Kevin's the Pastoral Welfare Adviser in the university who works with a lot of our students to keep them on track and retain them when they have difficulties.
Pastoral Support Adviser, I suppose a quick think about what that means. We heard from Kendall, who's the Academic Support Advisor. Is that the correct title, yeah, Kendall? Right. So changing the front bit. So it's not academic, it's pastoral. In some ways, I suppose it's all the other stuff, other things that may come up for students that don't focus on a pure core academic concept. So it could be anything really, and we end up talking about academic stuff as well. Just naturally, it's just working with people, with individuals within the school. Time and space for them to talk, to be listened, to be taken seriously, work together to see where they want to go from there, what they want to do with things from there. So that's kind of what I do. So in some ways I've been invited along today not with any kind of specific or expert focus around dyslexia, and like lots of other people in the room. But I thought I'd try and use that as much as possible, trying to reflect, I suppose, on my role, my contact with students with dyslexia within the context of specific learning disabilities, to maybe have a bit of a think, bit of a chat about how I work, what I do with those students who I do meet, who do have dyslexia, who bring that up as something for us to talk about. We've heard quite a bit today, I suppose, about study skills, about the nature of studying itself, studying on modules, programs, assessments, learning, teaching, assessment. And maybe that's an area which I don't work with so much. Maybe it's not so much kind of that study academic focus, but something more around kind of surviving study and surviving the experience of being at university. Possibly something broader about that total challenge that university presents to all students. Each and every student comes to university. It's a significant experience. It's a big place. It can be difficult to negotiate. And those are the challenges I work with all students, no matter where they come from. And that last point I think is really important to me and to my practice and how I work. I work with a person. I suppose I work with people as I find them and as they find themselves. Rather than with a label or with a diagnosis or coming forward with, you have this thing, so you will be this way and that's what we're going to work on. I think there's a lot of listening involved, a lot of taking that person as I find them. And so my work is about, I think, listening, empathy, trying to identify goals together and working with that student around how they want to attain those goals. And with that, I've definitely got an understanding, I think, that everybody's different. We've heard a lot about that today, possibly especially in Mark's presentation, around inclusive practice. That the degree of difference, the nature of difference is important, but everyone's different. And getting to know that individual, that person, is key and critical with all students, including students with dyslexia. I think the process of giving somebody time, giving someone attention, treating them as important, encouraging them around what they want to do, is good for everybody, no matter what, and just as good for students with dyslexia as anybody else. The kind of global overview, I suppose, of what I do and how I do it. Thinking how that translates into dyslexia, the work I tend to end up doing, which is dyslexia focused with students who have dyslexia, a lot of it is sort of almost dealing with dyslexia. And I think for me, most of my work tends to focus on two different aspects of that. I think one is around trying to come to an understanding or coming to terms with, especially a first dyslexia assessment. Again, we've heard about a lot about that today, that students are still very much coming to higher education without a formal diagnosis or assessment, or even an informal one sometimes, and that's still something that happens a lot, that we see a lot within our school. Not necessarily just with mature students either. Kendall's talked about that experience of informal assessment within school rather than a formal assessment. We certainly see that as well. But within nursing midwifery, we have a lot of mature students as well, people who've been out of education for a very long time. So these first assessments very much come up for us. And the work I do around that tends to be significantly around the emotional impact of that, what that actually means to that person, and what it means for them. I've been really encouraged today. I heard lots of people talk about how that can be a positive, and I think it very much can be. It's sort of, from my experience, it seems like for a lot of people feel that, okay, that now explains everything. Or especially if you do the right work with that person, that's where they can get to. That, okay, I wasn't stupid. This isn't what it's about. There's something different, and I've got a better understanding around that. I do lots of work with those individual students to try and turn that assessment into understanding, and hopefully work with them to try and turn it into that positive. There can also be a lot of frustration as well, I suppose, dealing with those emotional elements too, of this idea that I have to read so much more than everybody else. All my work takes me much longer than everybody else. Trying to deal with that frustration and try to work out what that means for that person and how they overcome that, how they deal with that. And so a lot of it's around, I suppose, towards a renewed understanding with students who've had their first assessment, trying to turn it into the positive, trying to understand what that means for them. I think there is almost a sort of process of, now you know, that can allow you to learn a little bit more about what that means for you, turning that into understanding, and through that, I suppose, overcoming this and getting into a position, a situation where it's maybe not able to hold you back in the same way as it was before. So that's one area of work that I see a lot of, that kind of dealing with that first assessment. Second area, I think, is around a wider appreciation of dyslexia, what it means for you as an individual, you as a person. And in that wider context that I've talked about within my role, you know, the whole idea of reading, writing, words, of course is important. It's got a massive direct relevance to dyslexia. But it's broader than that for me as well. I think there are others who within the university, I've heard from some of them today, lots of other supports displayed next door, who are better able to work with that side of things than me. But my role is a little bit different, I suppose, to get this idea that there's so many kind of processing issues around dyslexia, that, and what that means outside of just that pure, narrow academic reading, writing, words sort of context. I see that manifesting itself in lots of different ways, but some of the most common ones I think are around students presenting to me with a lack of clarity from what they've been told. Maybe that's from class. I've been to a class, didn't quite get what they were talking about. It's also sometimes around assessment tasks, around how that module's designed, what it's aiming for, that sometimes getting the clarity around that can be really difficult. It can take a little while, maybe needs to be explained in different ways, packed up differently. So doing lots of that work with students as well to try and get them into a position where they can just understand what's going on, process that better for themselves. They've got the meaning and understanding that they need. Also, I see lots of students have a great challenge in getting themselves organised with the complexity of a programme at the university and staying organised once they've got there as well. So lots of my work is very basic, I suppose, almost life study skills kind of work around how to get your timetable organised, how to organise notes, how to take notes, all of those sort of things. So broader issues around that as well, all of which I think students can find really, really helpful. So our time spent together, I think, to try and summarise a little bit, the sort of things that we do are around trying to get a better understanding, reframing dyslexia, what it means for that person individually, and trying to offer the encouragement and the support that they need to get to a motivated, organised, focused place. It's working beyond a label and beyond a diagnosis, I think, so trying to get the students to think in terms of themselves individually. What do I need? How do I learn? How do I keep my goals really high? And how do I work to try and attain those goals? I think that's a real summary of lots of the work that we end up doing together. And then I was thinking about this, I listed those down. What do I need? How do I learn? How do I keep my goals high? How do I attain them? And I think that's the same for every student, with or without dyslexia. I think that's really important to keep hold of. Everyone should, be working on those ways, and time spent together can be really valuable to achieve that. That was something that I took from that. And I suppose the other side of things that I genuinely believe from working with a range of students, including students with dyslexia, that dyslexia doesn't need to inhibit deep learning. It doesn't need to inhibit having really high goals around your learning. It doesn't need to inhibit, if it's important to you, getting really high marks. That those things can be done, but there's a process that needs to be done, especially after a first or an initial assessment, of trying to understand how you as an individual learn, what you need, what's going to work from you, and getting a bit of support along the way can sometimes help with that. And I suppose that's what I do. So just some personal reflections today. They were the kind of things I thought about when Monica asked me to come along and talk. And maybe coming from a slightly different role. Similar to Kendall, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, discuss anything any further, if anything I said is of interest to people. Well, thanks for listening to me. It's very nice of you. Thank you very much.